Some knocks ask for food. This one begged for a forgotten past to be remembered. The rain poured with the fury of a grieving sky, drumming rhythmically on the rusted zinc roofs of Lagos and washing the city's dust into the drains that often gave up under pressure. It was closing time at Ize's place, a modest yet popular restaurant tucked beside a worn petrol station on the corner of Broad Street. The aroma of fried plantains, goat pepper soup, and ofada stew still lingered like a memory that refused to leave. Inside, Mr. Ize dried his hands with a white towel stained from years of service. He had just flipped the wooden open sign to closed when the knock came. Soft, hesitant, barely audible above the rain. He turned slowly, confused. Who would be out in this storm, let alone knocking on a restaurant window that clearly said closed in peeling black paint? Approaching the front glass pane, he squinted through the blurred curtain of water sliding down its surface. There, under the flickering yellow street lamp, stood a boy, no more than 12. His body was frail, shivering, wrapped in a torn t-shirt several sizes too big, with the words, Lagos Marathon 2009, faded across the chest. His shorts were threadbare, barely clinging to his waist. He was barefoot, his dark skin muddied and bruised from days, maybe weeks, on the street. Ize hesitated. Something about the boy stirred unease in his chest. He wasn't like the other children who sometimes came begging. This one wasn't holding out his hands or tapping aggressively. He simply looked through the glass as if searching for something. Or someone. Then, with a soft motion, the boy mouthed something. Eze leaned closer to the glass, trying to catch the shape of the words, but he couldn't hear anything. Then the boy collapsed. Eze didn't think he just reacted. He pushed the door open, rain gushing in like a tidal wave of regret, and rushed out. His staff, 2 young women and 1 teenage boy, watched nervously from inside as their boss knelt on the soaked pavement beside the unconscious child. Chisom, Ize whispered without thinking, the name escaping his lips like a ghost returning home uninvited. He hadn't spoken that name in 14 years. He carried the boy inside, his clothes instantly drenched, ignoring the looks of confusion on his workers' faces. He laid the child gently on a bench in the corner of the restaurant, wrapped him in one of the freshly laundered tablecloths, and gestured for someone to bring water. Oga, who be this Pekin? Nosy, the head waitress asked. Eze didn't answer. His hands trembled as he reached out to gently lift the wet curls of hair off the boy's forehead. The shape of the eyes, the slight dimple beneath the left cheek, the curve of the chin, they were hauntingly familiar. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be. Bring dry clothes from the storeroom. Quickly, he said. His voice was hoarse, strained, as if holding back something far heavier than tears. The boy stirred faintly, his eyelids fluttering like moth wings caught in a web. Then he whispered, barely audible, Mummy said, "You'd come." Eze staggered back, knocking over a stack of utensils with a loud crash. The room fell into shocked silence. Outside, the rain intensified, as if the heavens themselves were pressing against the roof to witness what was unfolding. 1,000 images rushed through his mind. A young woman with fire in her eyes and sorrow in her voice, her arms crossed over a growing belly, her words sharp. You'll regret this, Ize. Not for me, but for him. He had walked away that day. Shoulders hunched, not from pride but from cowardice. And now, here lay a child, drenched in rain, burdened with hunger, echoing a name no one else should have known. Nosy returned with the clothes. Oga, should we call hospital? Maybe police? Eze shook his head slowly. No, not yet. His eyes never left the boy's face. Just let him rest. He touched the boy's wrist, checking for a pulse. It was weak, but steady. The child's breathing deepened as warmth began to return to his limbs. The staff moved away, murmuring in hushed tones, but Eze remained frozen beside the bench, towel in one hand, pain in the other. He whispered again, barely audible, his voice cracking. Chisom. A bolt of thunder cracked the sky, shaking the glass. The lights flickered, then steadied. Eze closed his eyes. It can't be him. I buried that chapter long ago. Some people close doors to protect their dreams, others to hide their sins. 14 years earlier, the sun wasn't kind. It scorched the pavements of Lagos and lit up the wide courtyards of the Federal Culinary Institute, where a younger, slimmer, idealistic Eze moved with urgency, sweat glistening on his brow not from heat alone, but from hope. He was 23 and determined to make something of himself, not just for ambition but to step out from under the long shadow of his older brother, Agu Eze, a calculating businessman with influence in both politics and real estate. The family legacy lay with Agu, but Eze? He had pots, pans, and dreams. That was the year he met Nkiru. She was everything he wasn't: calm where he was anxious, deliberate where he was impulsive. She studied political science at Unilag but worked part-time as a cashier in a nearby grocery store where Eze bought spices. Their connection was immediate, inevitable. She laughed like someone who'd seen sorrow and learned how to disarm it. Her hair was always tied in a neat puff behind her head, her skin deep ebony, her eyes sharp, always reading between lines, even his silences. When Nkiru told him she was pregnant, they sat on the steps of his hostel, her hands tightly clasped over her belly. "I'm not asking for miracles, Eze," she said. "Just don't disappear," he promised. And for a while, he meant it. But then Agu found out. The news did not fall gently. Agu didn't yell. He didn't need to. He simply said, "You want to throw away your future for a mistake? That girl isn't one of us. She's not Igbo. She's not elite. She's not useful." Eze tried to resist, but his brother was a master of manipulation. Within days, the pressure became suffocating. He was told he'd lose his scholarship, his hostel space, even his place in the family home. Agu arranged for Nkiru to be helped a quiet arrangement with her landlord that would see her relocated. "To a better place," he said. Nkiru vanished soon after. Eze was told she had accepted a relocation package and moved abroad. He waited for a letter, a phone call, anything, but none came. He blamed her for leaving, for not trusting him. What he didn't know, what he wouldn't discover for years, was that Nkiru had written him a letter the night she left. A long, weeping letter sealed with hope and heartbreak. It never reached him. Agu intercepted it and then burned it in front of his driver. "Focus on your future," Agu said. "She's gone for good." And Eze did. He opened the restaurant. He married. But every birthday, every quiet night, every smell of fried onions brought her memory back like a shadow refusing to leave. Back in the present, in the quiet of the now-closed restaurant, Eze sat beside the unconscious boy. The storm had passed, but his soul still thundered. Chisom stirred, his lips parted. "Mummy said, you'd come." Back in the present, the boy mumbles in his sleep. "Mummy said you'd come." Sometimes the past isn't buried, it's just hidden in a dusty drawer. Eze couldn't sleep that night. He paced the narrow hallway of his home, every creak of the wooden floorboards echoing his guilt. The boy Chisom rested in the guest room, wrapped in clean blankets. He'd eaten, but barely spoken since waking. Eze's wife, Amaka, watched him with a strange distance in her eyes. The silence between them wasn't anger, it was something more unsettling. It was recognition. In a sudden panic, Eze went to the storeroom. It was cluttered with old boxes, receipts, unused equipment from his first restaurant venture, and memories he had tried hard to bury. He tore through them, his hands shaking, sweat forming along his brow despite the coolness of the early morning air. One box near the bottom, dusty and sealed with yellowing tape, caught his attention. When he opened it, time collapsed. Dozens of letters, unopened, bundled together with a faded red ribbon, fell into his lap. His breath caught. He didn't need to read the handwriting on the envelopes to know they were from Nkiru. The first letter opened with the words, "I waited for days, and then I knew you weren't coming." Each envelope carried the weight of years. Nkiru had written about the pregnancy, the loneliness, her heartbreak. One letter described her delivery in a rural clinic, the struggle to find clean water, the constant fear of being found by the wrong people. She described Chisom in detail, his laugh, his stubbornness, the way he looked at her as if she were his whole world. She also mentioned an illness. She had been coughing blood, feverish. She had feared she wouldn't make it long enough to see her son grow up. Midway through the bundle, a photograph slipped out. Eze picked it up with trembling fingers. A small boy, maybe 6 or 7, smiled up at the camera, wide eyes, left cheek dimple. The resemblance was undeniable. Behind him, Amaka stood at the doorway. She had watched the whole thing. Her voice was low, controlled. "How long have you lied to me, Eze?" He turned slowly, his guilt written across every inch of his face. "I didn't know, I swear. I thought she left. I didn't know," she wrote. "I didn't know." Amaka stared at him, eyes glassy. "But you suspected. All those nights, all those questions, and you never searched." He dropped to his knees. The letters clutched against his chest like a desperate prayer. "I failed her. And now I don't even know if she's alive." Amaka's voice was sharper now. "Then you need to find out what happened to her. For that boy. For yourself. For all of us." With trembling hands, Eze picked up the final envelope, thinner than the rest, sealed with a sticker that read, "Only open when you're ready to face the truth." He hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a single folded paper, a birth certificate. And listed under father was a name that was not his. Eze opens one last envelope, and inside is a birth certificate, with someone else listed as father. When systems fail mothers, their stories die unnamed. In the pale gray of a dawn that carried no promises, Nkiru stood at the back entrance of a high-rise building in Surulere, dressed in a cleaner's faded uniform that hung loosely over her fragile frame. The collar was frayed, her hands covered in calluses, and her chest ached with every breath she took. It had been years since she saw a doctor, years since anyone had called her by name with tenderness. The sickness had started quietly. Night sweats, persistent coughs, aching bones, but now it roared with every step she took. Still, she showed up, because Chisom needed to eat. Each job barely lasted a few months. Her real name couldn't be used. Her ID had expired long ago, and getting a new one was impossible without risking her location. She cleaned offices, washed toilets, scrubbed floors with shaking hands, and hid her cough in the noise of vacuum cleaners. Whenever she was paid, she smiled and bought bread, a kara, and sometimes a tin of milk if the pay had been good. And each night, she held Chisom close in a rented single room with peeling walls, and thanked God he was still hers. But the weight of survival was crushing her. When Chisom turned 10, he asked, "Mummy, why do you cry when you think I'm asleep?" She lied, like mothers often do when their bodies are failing, but their love refuses to. Then came the day she couldn't rise from bed. Her breathing had become too labored, her joints too stiff. She wrapped her son in a scarf, placed all their money into his pocket, and whispered, "Go to the church. Ask for Sister Ifeoma. Tell her your name. Tell her, I'll come soon." But she didn't. At the hospital, they asked for ID. She didn't have one. They asked for next of kin. She didn't dare list anyone. They asked for money. She had none left. They told her to wait. She waited 6 hours on a cold plastic bench, surrounded by strangers, coughing and bleeding and weeping. No one asked her if she was okay. No one asked what she had lost. And when her body slid sideways and her head fell against the wall, people assumed she was asleep. She died without fanfare, without anyone to claim her. Her body, unclaimed for 3 days, was transferred to the morgue. She was tagged unknown female, aged to 30. The hospital buried her in a mass grave alongside others who carried secrets the world never heard. No tombstone, no marker, just soil. Back at the church, Sister Ifeoma waited. But days turned to weeks. She filed papers, made inquiries, and eventually registered the boy at a nearby orphanage under the name he provided. She promised herself she'd find his mother someday. But Lagos is a city where people disappear daily and silence is louder than sirens. Chisom waited every Sunday by the church gate, his scarf clutched in hand. "Mummy said she'll come," he'd whisper to the wind. Now, years later, inside the dim kitchen of Eze's restaurant, Chisom sat up on the cot that had been prepared for him. The smell of stew simmering in a distant pot filled the air. He rubbed his eyes and looked around. His limbs still ached, but warmth surrounded him now. Pillows, clean clothes, a glass of water beside the bed. Eze entered quietly, holding a tray of yam porridge and grilled fish. His hands were steady, but his heart shook with every step. He placed the tray down and sat beside the boy. Chisom looked at him for a long moment, longer than a child usually studies a stranger, but Eze wasn't a stranger, not in the boy's eyes. "My name is Chisom," the boy said quietly, picking at the fish. "My mummy said my father had a restaurant." Eze nodded, trying to find words in a mouth full of guilt. "She said he used to smile with his whole face, that he was young, kind, confused, but good." Eze's lips trembled. She told you about me?" Chisom looked up with eyes that carried far more sorrow than any child should hold. "She said you didn't come. But maybe you didn't know. Maybe you forgot." Eze wanted to cry, to reach for the child, to beg. But the boy wasn't done. "She died. You know?" he whispered. "On the road, people stepped over her. The church said she was buried with numbers instead of a name." Eze turned away, his chest heaving. "I waited," Chisom said, "every Sunday." Silence stretched until it snapped. Then the boy said something that cut deeper than any accusation. Chisom, awake at the restaurant now, looks at Eze and says, "You left us." Some documents tell truths. Others were paid to forget them. The morning after Chisom's devastating accusation, Eze barely slept. The boy's words haunted him, echoing in every creak of the restaurant's old pipes and every passing siren on the distant Lagos street. But guilt without action was just another form of cowardice, and Eze had promised himself this time he would not run. He began by seeking legal custody. If nothing else, he would ensure Chisom's safety, give him a home, and undo some of the wrongs of the past. But as he sat before the adoption registrar and filled out forms, something strange happened. The official looked up, puzzled, then asked him to wait. 10 minutes later, she returned with a document that made Eze's blood run cold. According to the system, Chisom already had a legal father. Not Eze. The man named Dominic Nwachukwu was listed on the digital record as Chisom's biological parent. Eze had never heard the name before, but after a few frantic calls and some discreet inquiries, the connection became all too clear. Dominic had once worked as a consultant to Eze's elder brother, Chika Eze, who now owned a string of businesses across 3 states and was known for his ability to fix problems. Eze's stomach turned. Could his own brother have manipulated the system? Had Chika gone so far as to erase the truth from government records? He visited a retired court clerk who owed him a favor. With trembling hands, the elderly man showed him records of system access logs from over a decade ago. It was their evidence of tampering, names deleted, parentage altered. One specific transaction stood out, flagged by the system for unusual access. Nkiru Enobasi, child ID updated, custodial identity reassigned. Who requested this change? Eze asked. The clerk squinted. Says it came from a private notary in Surulere. But that address was tied to a shell office linked to your brother's firm. The air grew heavier. The police officer he spoke to was blunt. Sir, you're looking at a forgery network that's been protected for years. Birth records, identity swaps, falsified custody, all under the table, all for the right price. If your brother's involved, tread carefully. Eze left the office with a growing weight pressing against his chest. As he approached his restaurant, he noticed a brown envelope wedged beneath the front gate. No name, no stamp, just smudges from dirty fingers and damp ink. He took it inside and opened it in his office. Inside were 3 items: a folded newspaper clipping from 14 years ago with a missing persons notice for Nkiru, a printed photo of Chisom walking alone through a busy market in Ibadan, clearly taken from a distance. A handwritten note in red ink. Stop digging, or next time he disappears for real. Eze's hands began to shake. He called the staff together. Who delivered this? He asked, waving the envelope. They all looked confused. Ngozi stepped forward. Oga. It was just there this morning. Maybe from a delivery man, but nobody saw. Eze retreated into his office and locked the door. He stared at the photo of Chisom, focusing on the angle, the shadows, the cars in the background. It wasn't recent, it was likely taken weeks ago, maybe even before the boy arrived. But what chilled him wasn't the photo itself. It was the implication. Someone had been watching Chisom, possibly following him, and now they knew where he was. Could this have been the reason Nkiru stayed hidden all those years? Had she sensed something darker beyond Eze's betrayal threatening her son? Eze felt a knot tightening inside his stomach. He needed help, but the police had warned him his brother's money flowed deeper than the law. If he pushed too hard, he'd risk not just his reputation, but Chisom's life. He scanned the rest of the envelope. No fingerprints, no name, but there was something else taped inside. The flap was a torn business card. It read, Dominic NWACHEWU, Civic Legal Liaison. He had to find this man. The clock ticked on. In the restaurant's hallway, Chisom stood quietly, holding a cup of water. His eyes met Eze's through the glass door. Eze walked out and knelt beside him. Did anyone ever follow you? From the last place you stayed? The boy thought. There was a man in a car once, blue Jeep. He asked me if I liked running. Eze felt bile rise to his throat. Did you ever tell anyone where you were going? Chisom shook his head. Mummy said not to. Just then, a shadow moved past the window. Eze jumped to his feet, heart pounding. Nothing, only the rustle of a passing Okada and the cry of a hawker calling out for customers. But the fear had already settled in. One photo shows Chisom in a different city with someone watching him. Some men silence women. Others try to steal their children. The next morning, Eze stepped out into the cloudy Lagos air, determined to uncover the full truth. He headed to Victoria Island, to a high-rise hotel that bore the name Chica Royale Suites. The name was ironic now, given the rot Eze suspected lay behind those polished glass doors. His brother, Chica, had always been two things, ambitious and ruthless, and Eze was finally ready to confront both. When Chica saw him, the surprise was short-lived. He smiled and gestured toward a leather chair in his opulent office. You're here about the boy, I assume. Eze sat down without returning the smile. You forged documents. You intercepted her letters. You knew Nkiru never left the country. Chica poured himself whiskey. And yet here you are, thriving, married, a restaurant owner, a respected man. You're welcome. Eze slammed his fist on the table. You had no right. Chica leaned in, dropping all pretense. She was going to destroy everything. Our family's name, your chances. You weren't strong enough to walk away, so I did it for you. Eze's hands balled into fists. You forged a birth certificate, rewrote a child's identity. Chica shrugged. The boy needed stability. You needed distance. I gave you both. He pulled open a drawer and tossed a file on the desk. Inside were copies of the altered documents and Nkiru's name erased, Dominic Nwachukwu inserted as father, custody notes filed through a now-defunct orphanage. I tried to adopt him, you know, Chica said quietly. Legally. But that woman refused. She ran, hid, acted like you were some kind of saint. You weren't. You abandoned her. Eze's voice cracked. I never got her letters. I never even knew she kept the baby. Because I took care of that, Chica snapped. Do you think I was going to let some girl drag our name through the mud with stories of betrayal and street births? He poured another drink. Now be smart, brother. Drop this. Focus on your wife, your life. Let the past stay dead. Eze didn't respond. Instead, he slowly pressed the side button of his phone. It had been recording since he stepped into the building. You always talked about legacy, Eze said. Maybe now you'll have one in court. Chica laughed. No one will believe you, not against my lawyers. But his smirk faded when Eze stood and stared him down. I'm not scared of your money anymore. Eze walked out without another word. That evening, back at home, Eze transferred the recording to a USB drive and hid it behind a loose tile in his study wall. He knew better than to trust digital backups when dealing with powerful enemies. He sat with Chisom later, showing him old photos of Nkiru. The boy stared silently, eyes wide, one finger tracing her smiling face. "She was beautiful," he whispered. Eze's heart cracked open again. "Yes. And strong. She gave everything to protect you." Later that night, as rain began to patter against the windows, Eze tucked the boy into bed. He checked all locks, turned on the alarm system, and placed the letters he still had into a small, fireproof safe. At 2:47 a.m., the house alarm blared. Eze rushed out of bed. The front door was ajar, the study window shattered, papers were scattered, the safe was gone. He ran into Chisom's room. The boy was still asleep, untouched, but the tile on the study wall was broken. The USB drive was missing, so were the letters. Whoever had come knew exactly what to take. The past wasn't done haunting them. That night, someone breaks into Eze's home. Letters go missing. He didn't want food. He wanted to be seen. It began with voices low at first, then sharp enough to break through the thin bedroom wall. Chisom sat up in bed, clutching his pillow, listening to Eze and his wife arguing in the living room. "She's dead, Ugochi," Eze said. "But the boy lives. He's not just a memory, he's my son." "You've built this life on lies," she snapped back. "What about our own children? What about what people will say?" "I'm trying to do the right thing now." Chisom didn't hear anything after that. The words swirled in his head like a hurricane. Lies. Dead. Not just a memory. His fists clenched. Was he a ghost in someone else's story? By dawn, he was gone. Chisom didn't pack much. A bottle of water, the pendant he wore under his shirt, and a wrinkled note from Eze's drawer, an old letter from a woman named Nkiru, signed, "Love Mummy." He slipped through the neighborhood unnoticed, dodging Okadas and Danfos, navigating through early morning rain puddles until he reached a part of the city that felt forgotten. A burnt-out school compound stood crooked near an old market. That's where he stopped. Inside the school's crumbling classroom, walls were marked with charcoal graffiti and old political posters. He curled up in a corner, trying to shut out the world. Hours passed. Then, a voice, sharp but curious. "You don't belong here." Chisom looked up. A girl about his age, maybe slightly older, stood in the doorway. She had tight braids, worn flip-flops, and the kind of posture that suggested she was used to surviving alone. "You're the boy from the restaurant, right?" she asked. "The one who vanished on the news?" He didn't answer. She stepped inside. Slowly. "Name's Zainab. I've seen your face before. Somewhere." Chisom's voice cracked. Do you know who my mother was?" Zainab paused, then nodded. "Come with me." She led him through alleyways and broken streets, finally arriving at a rundown convent on the city's edge. The gates were rusted, but the compound was peaceful. Flowers bloomed defiantly through cracks in the earth. An elderly nun met them at the door, her eyes widened the moment she saw Chisom. "His eyes," she whispered. "He has her eyes." "Whose?" Chisom asked. The nun led them inside. "Your mother, child. Nkiru. She once worked here. Cleaned the chapel floors while coughing blood." Zainab nodded. "I saw her too. She brought you here once tiny, wrapped in a shawl." The nun disappeared into a back room, then returned holding a small velvet pouch. She left this behind the night she collapsed. Said someone would come one day. Inside the pouch was a simple bracelet, worn, frayed, but still carrying the faint scent of lavender soap. Chisom ran his fingers over it as if touching her. He didn't cry. Not yet. The nun offered him food and a blanket, but Chisom declined. "I need to see where she island." She hesitated. "There's a graveyard behind the chapel. But there are no names, only dates." Chisom walked out into the dimming light, past a stone statue of St. Mary, toward a small churchyard overgrown with weeds. He stepped carefully through the rows, reading the inscriptions, Unknown male, 2013. Baby girl, 2015. Unnamed infant, 2011. And then he found it. A wooden cross, half sunken into the soil, weather-beaten and quiet. Unknown woman, 2014. He dropped to his knees. Something inside him finally broke. He whispered, "I found you, Mummy." He placed the bracelet at the base of the cross, kissed the wood, and stayed there as night fell. The world had never seen him fully, not as a son, not as someone born of love and grief. But here, in front of the grave, he was more than a headline. He was a witness. Chisom finds a grave in a small churchyard, marked only Unknown Woman, 2014. A nameless grave doesn't mean a forgotten story. Chisom remained kneeling before the grave, the fading light wrapping the churchyard in a dusky embrace. His fingers clenched the damp earth, the bracelet now resting against the rotted wood of the nameless cross. He didn't need confirmation. He knew. The silence of the soil spoke louder than the noise of the world. Behind him, footsteps approached slowly. The kind of steps that carried the weight of years, regret, and truths delayed. Eze stood there, breathless. His clothes were creased, his face drawn, his eyes red. He had searched every shelter, hospital, and police post until one quiet nun had pointed him here. He saw the boy's silhouette against the grave and stopped. "It's hers, isn't it?" Eze whispered. Chisom didn't look up. Why did she have to die alone? The man dropped to his knees beside the boy. For a while, they said nothing. The wind moved gently through the tall grass. The sky darkened. Eze's voice finally cracked. "I should have found her sooner. I should have fought harder. I believed lies, and I let her slip away." Chisom turned. "She believed you would come, even when she was sick, even when we had nothing." Eze nodded, his shoulders trembling. "I failed both of you." They sat in silence, man and boy, father and son, mourning a woman buried without a name. Eventually, Eze stood, brushing soil from his trousers. "She deserves more than this. A wooden cross and no name? No, we'll fix it." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded legal document. "This is a petition, to exhume the body, to run DNA, to prove she was Nkiru Amaechi. I'll get her name carved in stone, properly, publicly." Chisom stood beside him, taller than he'd ever felt. "Will they allow it?" "They'll have to," Eze said. "I'll make sure they do." By the next morning, Eze was in front of a magistrate, presenting the case with tears in his voice and the truth in his hands. Witness statements, the nun's confirmation, the bracelet, all laid bare. 2 days later, the court approved the exhumation. The burial site was sealed, forensics arranged. Word began to spread. A local reporter picked up a whisper of the story. Nameless woman turns out to be mother of mystery boy from viral restaurant clip. A cameraman arrived at Eze's restaurant, followed by more journalists. "Is it true you're the boy's father?" one asked, shoving a mic forward. Eze hesitated, but Chisom, now standing beside him, squeezed his hand. His voice steady, he answered, "Yes, he is my son." The cameras clicked, flashbulbs exploded, but Chisom didn't flinch. He looked straight into the lens, not as a beggar or a ghost of the past, but as a child whose mother would finally be seen. A call from a national journalist. "Is it true this boy is your son?" The same place that fed the hungry now feeds the truth. The restaurant that once closed its doors after midnight now opened early, not for customers but for something greater. Cameras lined the entrance, microphones set along a long table covered in white cloth. Eze stood at the center, with Chisom beside him, their backs straight despite the whirlwind of the last few weeks. The press conference was short, but powerful. Eze cleared his throat, voice echoing into a sea of reporters. This restaurant was built to feed bodies, but today, it feeds truth. "My name is Eze Chuka, and this is my son, Chisom, the boy whose story touched this city." The journalists leaned forward. Flashes snapped. Chisom nodded humbly. Eze continued, "His mother was the love of my youth, a woman betrayed by a system, by silence, by me. But today, we're done hiding. We're telling her story, his story, and we won't stop until justice is served. By the next morning, social media platforms exploded with the hashtag #ChisamReturns. Donations poured in: food, school supplies, medical care, even legal aid offers. Parents messaged from all over Nigeria, saying how their children cried watching Chisam speak. "He reminded us what we've forgotten," one mother wrote, "to see people, not problems." Eze, overwhelmed but determined, took a bold step. He converted the restaurant's upper floor into a shelter for homeless boys. Volunteers helped repaint walls, install beds, and create a kitchen learning station. The place began to hum, not just with orders but with purpose. Street kids who once peeked through the windows now stood inside, aprons around their waists, helping wash dishes and sweep floors. Chisam became their quiet leader. He learned how to roll dough, chop vegetables, simmer sauces, and smile again. A news segment aired. "From orphan to chef in training, Chisam stirs hope in every pot." But not everything was healing. Behind the scenes, police investigations pressed deeper. Forgery units uncovered a trail of altered hospital records, switched birth certificates, and payments linked to none other than Eze's elder brother, Obinna. When asked about it publicly, Eze remained firm. "I won't speak against my blood, but I will speak for truth." Privately, however, he provided all evidence: the letters, the recordings, and a list of contacts Obinna had used. One afternoon, while Chisam served jollof rice to a queue of eager teens, 2 detectives arrived. "Mr. Eze," one of them said solemnly, "your brother, he's gone. Left the country through private charter last night. We suspect he's in South Africa, maybe Dubai." Eze leaned against the kitchen wall, the weight of betrayal sinking deeper. He closed his eyes. He knew it was coming. "But we have enough for extradition," the officer added. "It won't be easy, but we'll try." Eze nodded slowly. "Do what you must." Outside, the laughter of children echoed into the sky, and Chisam's voice rose above the hum. "Service up, try the stew, it's fire." Justice would be slow, complicated, messy. But the boy who once knocked on a glass window now stood behind the counter, no longer begging but offering. Cliffhanger. Police inform Eze, "Your brother has fled the country." One file held the truth, but someone paid to keep it closed. A week after Obinna's disappearance, the police finally received a tip from an anonymous whistleblower. A name, an address, and one quiet message: "The man you need still works at the records office." Detectives visited the dusty government building, where peeling paint and jammed ceiling fans told stories of forgotten truths. Inside, they met Baba Dogo, a clerk in his 60s, face marked with time, fingers stained with ink. They questioned him cautiously. "I remember her," Baba Dogo said, opening an old drawer. "Nkiru. She came here alone, pregnant, quiet eyes, but proud. She asked me to file a proper birth record." He rummaged through a locked cabinet and pulled out a faded manila folder. Inside were original documents, unforged, untouched. A birth form, hospital logs, witness signatures. Chisam's name was listed, and in bold handwriting, under father's name, Eze Chuka. The clerk continued. "Weeks later, a man came with money. Told me to replace the name. Said it would protect the boy. I refused. Then my assistant disappeared, and my records drawer was tampered with. I hid the original files. But it wasn't just paper. From a tin box, Baba Dogo pulled out a USB stick. The police watched the footage. A shaky hospital video showed Nkiru in labor, crying out in pain. The timestamp read, the 24th of October 2014. Her voice cracked with agony, but she kept repeating one word: "Eze, Eze, where are you?" Tears rolled down Eze's cheeks when he watched the video. The officers prepared the full file documents, the video, and witness testimony. Within days, it was submitted to the family court. Courtroom 7 was packed the day of the hearing. News crews remained outside, unable to enter, but whispers filled the hallway. Eze sat straight, a protective hand on Chisam's back. The boy looked nervous, but not afraid. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair and hard eyes, reviewed the evidence. She asked one question to the clerk. Are you willing to testify that the document forgery was intentional and not an error? I am, Baba Dogo said, without flinching. After a long pause, the judge nodded. I hereby declare Eze Chuka as the legal and biological father of Chisom Nkiruka Chuka. All prior claims to guardianship are void. Full custody is granted to Mr. Chuka. There was no applause, just a silence so deep it echoed. Outside the court, reporters jostled. Cameras rolled, but Eze didn't speak. He held Chisom's hand and walked straight to the car. Back at the restaurant, now transformed into both home and shelter, the staff gathered in quiet celebration. They baked a cake. Chisom sliced it. Later that night, while Eze was organizing some files upstairs, Chisom entered the room holding the certificate. He stood there, unsure. Eze turned. Everything okay? Chisom's voice was quiet. Does this mean I can call you Dad now? Eze dropped the pen he was holding. He walked over, knelt down, and wrapped the boy in his arms. I'd be honored, he whispered. Chisom says, does this mean I can call you Dad now? He missed 13 candles, but not the next one. It was the first time the restaurant had closed its doors for something other than a public holiday. But this day was different. This day belonged to a boy who had been forgotten too long, and a man who refused to miss another moment. Balloons tied in clusters swayed from the veranda. A small stage had been assembled near the back garden. A large banner read simply, Happy Birthday, Chisom. It was his 14th birthday, but his first ever party. Inside the kitchen, Eze and Chisom worked side by side, dressed in matching aprons. One read, Head Chef, the other, Apprentice. The boy chopped vegetables with the focus of a craftsman, his hands steady, his posture proud. Stir gently, Eze said, watching over his shoulder. Cooking is like love, too rough, and it burns. Chisom grinned. Then, we're making a feast today. Tables lined the courtyard, covered in colorful dishes, jollof rice, peppered chicken, moi moi, fried plantain. Volunteers from the shelter brought out trays, each dish a symbol of something more than food, survival, family, dignity. The guests began to arrive, street children who now called the shelter home. Local vendors who once offered Chisom a leftover puff-puff, the nun who gave him the bracelet, even the journalist who first broke his story. The community came not just to celebrate a birthday but to honor a life that refused to disappear. In the center of the courtyard stood a cloth-covered statue. As the crowd gathered, Eze took the microphone. Before this boy, he said, his voice cracking, I built my life around customers and profits. But he reminded me that behind every face is a story, some loud, some silenced. Today, we honor the woman who carried his story alone. He pulled back the cloth. Underneath stood a new tombstone, transported and restored from the nameless churchyard where Nkiru was buried. Now it bore a name, etched in gold, Nkiru Eze, a mother never forgotten. Chisom walked up and placed a bouquet of wildflowers at its base. Happy birthday, Mama, he whispered. You made this happen. The silence that followed was reverent, complete. As the sun dipped, music rose. Children danced. Chisom helped cut the cake. Laughter spilled through the windows. Plates emptied. For the first time, Chisom saw himself not as a survivor but as someone celebrated. Later that evening, Eze's wife stood near the edge of the crowd. She hadn't said much since the court ruling. Distance still lingered. But tonight, something had softened. She handed Chisom a small wrapped box. Inside was a recipe journal, her own, the one she had used when the restaurant first opened. I thought you might add to it, she said quietly. Chisom looked at her, surprised. Thank you, Ma. You can call me what you like, she replied, smiling faintly. But start with cook. And then came the moment, the one that made the night timeless. The crowd began to sing, not just Happy Birthday, but a fusion of Igbo, Yoruba, and English songs, an anthem of unity. Fireworks burst into the night sky, painting colors over years of pain. Chisom closed his eyes and made a wish not for toys or money but for courage to keep becoming who he already was. In the shadows beyond the restaurant gates, a figure stood quietly, a woman, Wrapped in a faded red shawl, tears rolling down her face, she stared at the boy with trembling hands. No one noticed her. But as the final spark of firework faded above, she turned slowly and walked away. Outside the restaurant, a woman stands quietly, watching with tears. Not every goodbye is final, some just take longer to return. The rain had stopped, but Lagos still carried the scent of wet concrete and cooling earth. Inside the restaurant, laughter echoed through the tiled halls, soft, human, healing. Chisom wore his apron proudly, his hands dusted in flour as he rolled dough for meat pies, humming a tune he didn't even realize he knew. That was when she walked in. A tall, dark-skinned woman stood at the entrance of the kitchen, cloaked in a plain maroon wrapper. Her face, though worn by time and oceans, was unmistakably tied to the past. Her cheekbones were Nkiru's. Her eyes held the same fierce gentleness. Everyone turned. No one spoke. Eze dropped the wooden spoon he was holding. "Chioma?" he said, voice trembling. She nodded once, her lips quivering. "I wasn't in Canada all these years," she whispered. "I was in silence, grieving where no one could reach me." She stepped forward and opened the small brown handbag she carried like it contained something sacred. From within it, she produced an old cassette tape, its label faded, nearly unreadable but scribbled in Nkiru's handwriting. "For Chisom, when he's old enough." "I found this," Chioma said, tears streaming down her face. Nkiru recorded it before everything. The room fell into silence as Eze took the tape with trembling hands. He led them all into the back storage room, now converted into a quiet reading lounge for the shelter's children. In the corner sat a cassette player, a donation from an elderly guest who once called the street home. He slid the tape in. With a soft mechanical hum, static crackled. Then, a voice emerged. Nkiru's voice. "Pure, Chisom, Milai Nudo, Mama di Ebe, my Chisom, sleep in peace, Mama is here." Chisom stood frozen, as if sound had become memory. He didn't cry at first. He simply walked toward the speaker, touched it like a relic, and slowly sank to his knees. Then the tears came hot, sudden, full of years he didn't know he was owed. Eze crouched beside him, hand resting on his son's back. Chioma closed her eyes and mouthed the words with her sister's voice. When the lullaby ended, the tape rolled into a faint static before fading. The silence was heavier than any sermon. The next morning, the restaurant opened with a new look. But not one that cost millions. Not one painted with gloss or gold. A new wooden sign now hung above the door, carved by local artisans. It read, "Nkiru's Table, a home for all." It wasn't just a name, it was a promise. Inside, the menu stayed the same, but a new dish had been added. Mama's moi moi, based on the scribbled recipe found inside the journal Nkiru once kept hidden in a plastic bag under her pillow. Chisom was now in charge of making it. Every plate he prepared, he whispered a quiet, "Thank you," before sending it to the table. Not just to his customers, but to his mother, who fought the world just to give him breath. The shelter was thriving. Donations poured in. Children came in, scared, hungry, ashamed, and left fed, clothed, dreaming again. Eze spent his mornings in the kitchen and his evenings organizing free cooking classes for street boys. His wife finally stood beside him during service, wearing the old apron she hadn't touched in years. Chioma decided to stay in Nigeria. She offered counseling services to young mothers and helped expand the shelter's reach. One wall of the restaurant was now a memory wall, photos of every street child who passed through, alongside a picture of Nkiru. At the center was a quote she had scribbled on the back of a receipt. "Even when they forget our names, may they remember our love." Evening light spilled across the kitchen. Chisom stood beside Eze, both of them wearing flour-stained aprons. They didn't talk much. The dough was rising perfectly. The soup was bubbling on time. The air smelled of thyme, onions, and something more subtle, something like belonging. Customers laughed in the distance. Outside, Lagos traffic crawled and generators hummed, and in the quiet corner of the kitchen, where the old cassette player still sat untouched, Easy pressed play one last time. The tape whirred, a voice returned. My Chisom, you're not alone. As the camera zooms out, we hear Enkiru's voice on tape. My Chisom, you're not alone. Did this story move you to tears? Don't just watch, join the movement for truth, justice, and forgotten voices. Like, comment your thoughts below, and share this video with someone who needs hope today. Subscribe now for more powerful, real-life inspired Nigerian dramas that reveal the secrets behind closed doors. Because every knock deserves to be answered.